Hi, Sarah.
Okay, Sarah, I'll give a quick intro about yourself and then you can take it over. We usually have about 35 or 40 minutes
about, and I think I've had every customer do that. They've often found a server that's maybe hidden under someone's desk, or a SQL Server database that's been installed temporarily and then never removed and has suddenly become a production workload. So doing that discovery really gives you a great idea of what you have in your environment. And then once you know what's in your environment, you can actually start to plan how you migrate. Now, your discovery phase shouldn't just be confined to your IT department. You should really be bringing in all the stakeholders within your business. I've worked in many many companies, and although IT look after the systems, sometimes it's the other departments that use these software that actually make the decisions about what happens to them. And we once had our HR department walk down into the IT department one day and say, here's our new contractor, they're going to be installing the new software for the HR system, can you help them? And then just left us to deal with this contractor that we'd never seen before, and this new system that we'd never known about, and we had to scramble about trying to find servers for this new HR system. So definitely involve your organisation, because they will have a great overview of the software that they're using and any plans for it. You'll also find maybe that they don't like the software, and this is an ideal opportunity for you to start to look at replacements. And you can start to look at replacements that are cloud native and can be hosted on, Azure or one of the other cloud providers as a SaaS or PaaS solution. And you can start to modernize your workloads that way as well. Now, there's lots of tools that can help you to do this discovery phase, and I do recommend that you do use some kind of tooling to help you. And I'll talk about Azure Migrate later on and about how it can help you, but there are third-party tools out there that can also help you. Now, during the discovery phase, what you'll find is that all your server workloads are actually interconnected. Your servers don't work in isolation, they all interconnect with each other. Whether that be just connecting into your Active Directory or your authentication methods, or things like connecting in with your SCCM servers for upgrades or management or antivirus solutions, all those connections need to be gathered. You need to think about them and think about what you're going to do beyond your on-prem environment and what it means if you move all these servers into the cloud as well. Now, I've got staff training on this, and this should be a key part of your discovery phase as well. You really need to understand where your staff's level of knowledge is in terms of the cloud. There is no point you moving all your servers into the cloud only to find out that your staff don't know how to use that cloud platform and don't understand it. And you'll probably find that there's some people in your department that have been maybe learning about the cloud in their own spare time and maybe have been sitting certifications, but not everybody's going to be at that level and have had that privilege of being able to do that. So make sure you look at where your staff are in terms of cloud knowledge, and then try and upskill them and build that into your plan as well. Now, you'll have noticed I didn't talk about cost, but this is another key thing that you do need to actually think about within your discovery phase. You need to have a look at what your current environment costs. A lot of customers are looking to save money when they move to Azure, but in order to understand if you're actually saving money when you move into Azure, you need to know what your current environment costs you to run. Traditionally, you're probably used to signing off that purchase order maybe once every 3 years or once every 5 years, where you buy a big bulk load of servers and a big bulk load of licensing, and then you really don't think about the cost beyond that. But let's face it, someone has to pay for the electricity, for the heating, for the cooling, for the staff overtime, and your wages really to make all those servers run throughout the year. So make sure you have a look at what that cost is for running your server estate, so that when you look at the cost in the cloud, you can have actually something to compare it with. At Microsoft, we have a bunch of tools that can help you, including the Azure Pricing Calculator, the Total Cost of Ownership Calculator, and we also have some guidance around how you can actually optimize your costs within the cloud as well. So it's not going to be an easy exercise to understand what your current environment costs, but it's something that you do have to spend some time on and have a look at. So as I said, there's a bunch of tools that can help you with this discovery phase, and one of them is Azure Migrate. Now, Azure Migrate has actually been around for a long time. It was announced in September 2017 at Ignite, and since it went generally available in February 2018, we've seen it grow in functionality. The team are always working at adding in that functionality and making it more useful to you. And it really has become the hub for your data center migration. We've got key migration scenarios. So the scenarios that you want to move, so your servers, your web apps, your databases, even just the raw data, can all be migrated with the help of Azure Migrate from the center there as well. We've got discovery, assessment, and migration capabilities. So you don't have to go to another tool. You can do it all from there. So you can discover what your server estate looks like. You can assess the costs of it. And you can also migrate them all from Azure Migrate. But that being said, we also have partnered with our ISV partners to look at how we can bring their tooling into Azure Migrate. So when you go to Azure Migrate within the Azure portal, you'll be able to see a bunch of other third-party tools, and you can mix and match. So you can use Azure Migrate for the discovery, and then you can use one of the third-party tools for the migration, or flip it round. There's lots of combinations that you can try out to suit your needs and where you are with your budget and your business as well. And that really just means that Azure Migrate is that central repository for your end-to-end tracking. So you don't have to, bookmark one URL to go to for your discovery tool, then have another one for your migration tool, and have to switch between the two of them. It seamlessly works and makes your life as an IT operator much easier. What I'm going to do is have a wee demo of Azure Migrate, and we can just walk through some of that discovery process and show you some of the information that it shows you. So here we are in the Azure portal, and we've got Azure Migrate here, and you can see we've got options to migrate servers, databases, even our VDI infrastructure, as I said. So it really is that one-stop shop and central repository for your needs. If we have a look at going into our server estate, what we can see is we have discovered a bunch of servers. So we've discovered 30,000 of our servers. And when we click into that, we can actually see some of the information that it's discovered. It's got the basic information you would expect: name, IP addresses, the core, the memory, storage, and what operating system is there as well. What's great about it is, as well, it's actually dived into our applications, and it can show us what's happening in the servers. So here we are with a bunch of the application inventory and the roles and features. So if we didn't know what this server did, we could probably have a look at the roles and features and applications and quickly understand what it is. On this server here, we've got file and storage services installed. So maybe it's actually a file server and hosts all of our file shares for the organisation. And we can start to have a look at it from that point of view as well. So there's lots of information being gathered that can help you understand what's happening in your environment. Once we have all that information discovered, what we want to do is an assessment. We want to understand how much it's going to cost if we were to move those servers into Azure, and also try and understand if there's any compatibility issues. Things like an operating system that's maybe not supported in Azure, etc. So what we've done is we've grouped our servers into the roles that they play within the organisation, and we've got our payroll servers. So there's 9 servers that we have that run our payroll application. What we've done is we've done an assessment around what it would look like if we moved those servers into Azure. So we've got instant information here around that 7 of those servers are Azure ready and fully supported, but there's 2 that might not be supported or might have some issues that we need to address before moving them to Azure. We've also got the monthly cost of what it would look like if we were to put these servers into Azure as servers. And we've got the monthly storage costs as well. So again, lots of information that we can take, we can dice up and present to our organisation, our stakeholders or your boss. We've also got the ability to export this report. So it comes down as an Excel spreadsheet, and you can then, do what you need to do in order to put that into a format that you can present to your board or whoever's deciding about the migration. What we want to do though is actually look at why those two servers are reporting as ready but with conditions. We want to understand that so that if there's any remediation work that we need to do, we can actually deal with it and be ahead of the curve before migration. So if we click into this, because it's an interactive report, we can see what's happening with those servers. Now the servers have loaded, we've got information around a recommended VM size within Azure, we've got a migration tool that we could use, suggestions as well. And if we scroll down, we can see that these two servers are marked as conditionally ready for Azure. And that's purely because of the operating system that they actually have installed on them. So the tool hasn't been able to properly understand what version of Linux or what version of CentOS OS is installed on those servers. And what we have to do as IT operators is go and have a look at what version of the operating system is actually installed on those servers, and then check the documentation to make sure that the version that they have installed is supported on Azure. And that's all that conditionally ready means. So it's just a little check for you to be able to go off and double check the documentation. So that's the discovery phase, and we've got our information discovered. What we now want to do is start to look at Migrate. So you've got all that data, you've had the approval from your stakeholders, and you're starting to migrate your workloads. And you're probably confronted with this. You're probably confronted with 5 R's, or I've seen 7 R's, and that's like rehost, refactor, re-architect, rebuild, or replace. And to be honest, a lot of people get stuck on this and start to think that the only way they can move to the cloud and the only way they should be moving to the cloud is by rebuilding or replacing with a PaaS or SaaS solution. I'm not in that camp. I say that you should move whatever way suits you. And there's a scenario that I want to talk to you about. So I had a customer once who had a data centre somewhere in the UK, and they came to us and said, we need to be out of our data centre by this certain date, and because a railway track is being built right through our data centre. We've got no choice about it. It's just happening and we need to migrate. They ended up migrating with all their virtual machines as IaaS virtual machines to the cloud, purely because of the timeline that they had. They didn't have the luxury of time to refactor, rebuild, or look at different solutions. So they just really had to do that lift and shift migration up into the cloud. And that's absolutely fine. They met their migration goals. They were out of the data centre before the railway tracks were being built, and they had their workloads safe and secure. And they're now currently working on modernising everything now that it's in the cloud, and they have more time and more flexibility around that. So please don't get stuck on which R you should be migrating with, and you might find that you have a mixture of these solutions. You might find that you have to just rehost some of your servers up into Azure as IaaS virtual machines, but you might find that it's time to maybe upgrade one of your applications, and the provider of that application, that vendor, actually has a SaaS solution that you can leverage and put into the cloud. So it's win-win. You get to upgrade that application and you get to use more cloud native tooling as well. So there really is no right or wrong answer when you're migrating, and that's something that I try and preach to everybody and try and remind them as well. Now, when you are migrating, please don't migrate your most important, critical, mission important workload up into the cloud. Please pick something that isn't going to get your boss's boss screaming at you down the phone if something goes wrong. You want to be migrating your first workload as something that doesn't affect the business. So pick something that's maybe only critical to the IT department. Maybe pick your intranet server. Something that's simple, but also gives you a bit of complexity to test your migration planning. Because what you want to do with every workload that you migrate into the cloud is learn new steps, refine your migration process, learn the do's and the don'ts, and just understand the timeline as well, so that when you do get to hit your mission critical applications and you're moving them up into Azure, you have a lot of skill set behind you, and you have a lot of confidence and knowledge in what you're doing as well. Please make sure you're communicating at every stage during the migration. Make sure you're communicating internally in your IT department and also with your end users. I've seen lots of migrations go wrong because people don't do communication. People don't communicate why things are going down when you're migrating. And things are unavailable, or they don't migrate, that some things will have to change and the end users have to adapt to this new change. And what ends up happening is that the end users get the wrong impression of the cloud and start to hate it and push against you for the rest of the migration project. You also want to be thinking about communication internally as well. So if you move a workload and something goes wrong, what you don't want is that person on your help desk running through to your data center and pushing the on button on the server and then confusing things even more, because you've got the application working on-prem and you've also got it up into Azure as well, and something happened, the data is getting written and it causes more issues than it actually solves by them being proactive and trying to fix the issue. So make sure there's lots of communication. Your documentation is getting updated as you progress through the migration stage, and also start to think about what's happening in terms of the managing, the monitoring, and your disaster recovery and your backups as well during the migrate stage. I've got some customers that like to do everything during the migrate stage. So once they migrate a workload, they put the backup in place, they put the disaster recovery in place, they make sure all the monitoring is in place, and then they move on to the next workload. I've also got customers that migrate all of their workloads and then put in their backup, their monitoring, and their disaster recovery. Either way, you really should be thinking about that. You really should be thinking about, am I using an existing tool I've already got? So there are some backup and disaster recovery tools that can help you monitor on-prem and Azure, but there's also some that don't allow you to do that. So is this a change of strategy? Are you going to be ditching that disaster recovery tool and backup tool that you currently use and going with something cloud native? Or are you going to use a blended approach? This is really the stage you should start to be planning for that, regardless of when you're going to implement it. Now, the Migrate stage can actually be assisted with Azure Migrate. We have great capabilities around doing this. We have the ability to move your workloads from VMware, Hyper-V, your physical servers, and we can even move your workloads that you might have stored within AWS. So if you have servers in another cloud provider, we can actually move you from there into Azure with Azure Migrate. And we can do that either with an agent or without an agent. At the moment, the agentless version is available for VMware migrations only. We also have the ability to test before you migrate, so you can do some kind of failover testing and you can understand the steps that you need to take before you do that production failover. And when you do test it, it isn't impacting your production environment, so it's really a sandbox for you to test and understand the migration process as well. Now, for a long time at Microsoft, we recommended that you use Azure Site Recovery for your migration, but we've kind of changed that advice now. As Azure Migrate has came on board and got more mature, what we are recommending now is that Azure Migrate is your migration tool. That's the tool you should be using for your discovery and your migration. Azure Site Recovery is the tool that we have designed for your disaster recovery, either on-prem or in the cloud. So there's a separate workload for each of these products, and if you're looking to do a discovery and migration project, you should really be thinking about Azure Migrate. So I have a demo of the process of migrating your servers from on-prem up into Azure. Now, I have sped it up, it is a video, but if we were to sit here and do it live, we would be here for several days and maybe even weeks, depending on some of the processes. So please bear with me. Yes, it is a video, and yes, I have sped it up. So let's have a look. Here we are in the Azure portal. And we've discovered all our servers, but now what we want to do is start that migration. So our servers are hosted on Hyper-V platform, and we want to move them into one of the US regions. So we tell the tool that that's what we want to do, and it sets up all of that for us. Next, what we want to do is actually download the tool that will assist us with the migration. So it's just a small file that you have to download and install on a server on your on-prem environment. It's quite an easy setup. You just go through a kind of next process, and you put in a small little authentication file that makes sure that it connects between your on-prem environment and Azure securely. It does take a little while to install, so that's why I've sped this up so that we can actually see the end-to-end process today. So now that we've got that installation of the software complete, what we want to do is go back into the Azure portal. And there's a small button that we have to click to finalise that registration, finalise that connection between our on-prem box and our Azure subscription. Now that it's finalised though, what we want to start to do is replicate our virtual machines. And we want to replicate them from on-prem up into Azure. So in order to do that, if we click on the discovered servers, we can see that during our discovery, we have discovered 4 servers. One of them is our Migrate appliance, but we're not going to be actually replicating that. We want to replicate those other servers that it found. So again, we confirm that it's a Hyper-V platform that we're migrating from, and we want to actually migrate based on the assessment tool. So during the assessment, what we did was do a performance-based assessment, and that helped us try and scale our virtual machines, try to see how much CPU, RAM that we used, storage that we used, and then give us an appropriate size for that. Because let's face it, we're all guilty of actually oversizing our virtual machines on-prem. So we don't want to be oversizing in Azure now. So we're going to take the recommendations from the discovery assessment and size our virtual machines during the migration appropriately. So we pick the group that we set up for these servers, and we pick the assessment data as well. And then we start to tick the boxes. So like I said, we want to move those 3 servers that we have for this application and actually migrate them. Now here we're asked about target settings, and this is about what subscription we want to migrate into, what resource group we want to use for the migration, what virtual network that we want our virtual machines to be attached to, and the subnet that we want them to be attached to as well. Now we've set up all this previously, so we have done what we call a landing zone. We have our virtual network, we have our subnet all set up. All of this is already prepared for us. Next, we want to confirm the size of virtual machine that we're moving, and just confirm the operating system type and which disk has been discovered is the right operating system disk. So if you have multiple disks installed, you're just confirming what you want to be migrated across and what's labelled as what. The next stage is about migrating those disks, and like I said, if you have multiple disks installed, you may not want to move all of them, so you have the option to be granular here. Now we've replicated, and we've started that replicating off. This is where some of the time will be taken. So depending on the size of your virtual machines and the size of your internet connection, the replication may take several hours, several days, or even several weeks. So it's important to plan that and investigate that. And to be honest, you should have had a look at that during your discovery phase. That's some things you need to think about: the speed of your broadband, the speed of connection from on-prem up into Azure, and the size of those virtual machines that you're actually replicating as well. But with the magic of video, we've actually been able to speed up this process, and we have all of our 3 virtual machines replicated up into Azure and in a state for us to start to test the migration. So what we want to do is do that test. We want to work through the process and do a test migration. So we pick the 3 servers that we actually want to test the migration with. And we go into each of the servers and we say, let's do that test migration. What this really does is take the copy of data that Azure Migrate has replicated up into Azure and spin up that server, actually create that virtual machine and make it into something that we can interact with. So all 3 servers have been started, and the test migration is actually underway in the background for us. Once the test migration is actually complete, what we can do is actually go into the resource group that we wanted everything to replicate into and start to look at these servers. We can start to interact with them. We can start to log into them. We can start to see what's happening with them. Is there any software we need to install on them now that they're in Azure? And is there any software that we need to uninstall within Azure? And just work through what we expect to happen and test those services have been fully operational. What you'll see here is the test migration has actually migrated the servers across, but with a -test appended to each of the name. And that shows that you know that they're the test migration and they're not the live server, and you don't get confused with the server on-prem and in Azure as well. But they're real live virtual machines, so you'll be able to click into them, you'll be able to RDP into them, etc., and interact with them just as you would a real server. They're fully operational, and it gives you that sandbox, like I said, to test with. They're completely isolated, they're not touching your production workload, and they're not interfering with the live servers that you still have on-prem either. So once we've carried out the ability to log into these servers and we've checked that, you know, we don't have any software we need to uninstall, we don't have any software we need to install on them, what we can do is start to clean up this test migration, because we don't want to leave them there running, because we're actually being charged for the compute and the storage while they're there in place. So we clean up all 3 of these servers and make sure that the resources that was spun up during the test is all deleted and we're not getting charged for anything. So now that we've done the test migration and everything's okay and we've tidied up our test migration, we actually want to do the live migration. So we want to migrate these servers away from on-prem up into the cloud. So we select the servers and we say that we don't, in this case, want to shut down the on-prem version of the servers during the migration. You can, of course, say yes, and what will happen is your on-prem servers will be shut down, meaning that the application or the resources will no longer be available to your end users during that migration phase. Now, every application and every workload that you migrate will be different. In this case, we're not doing it just purely because we don't need to for this application. No one should be using it. We're migrating out of ours. So that's Azure Migrate kicking off that migration. It's taking the replicated data that it took from on-prem and creating real live servers for us, servers that we can interact with, that our end users can connect with, and just act like the on-prem servers as well. If we go into our resource group, we'll be able to see these servers now. And when you look at it now, you can actually see that, sorry, I clicked the wrong button there. You can actually see that the servers have been spun up with their real name. There's no -test appended to them. They are the real live servers. What we have to do now is go back on-prem and shut off those servers, and then point everybody to these new servers so that they can connect into the application. But that's the end-to-end process. You discover the servers, you test, you replicate them, you do a test migration, and then you migrate them up into Azure. So now that your workloads are all in Azure and you're starting to look at that operationally as your default space, you start to think about how you can optimize in the cloud and how you can best use the cloud. And one of those things that people start to talk about is managing the cost, because on-prem, like I said before, you were used to maybe signing that purchase order off maybe once every 3 years or once every 5 years and never really thinking about the overall cost of your data center. In the cloud, it's different now. You're obviously paying as a kind of pay-as-you-go model. So you're paying per compute. You know, every minute, every second that something is spun up in the cloud, you're paying for it. So you want to start to track that, and you want to understand where your money's been spent and how you can best make use of the resources within the cloud and your budget available to you. Now, a lot of people get fixated on the cost and want it to be the lowest that they can ever get it to. And I see people getting stuck in this cost reduction model because they want to get the lowest that they can. And this is where they start to come into some issues. I've seen organisations move their workloads up into the cloud and then start to try to reduce their costs by resizing virtual machines to a smaller size, almost on a weekly basis, because they see that the utilisation isn't high. So they shut their virtual machine down, they resize it to a smaller size, and they're all happy because they've spent less money. But what happens the week after? Something gets triggered, a big workload, and that virtual machine runs out of resources and things start to grind to a halt, and they start to get help desk calls complaining that the application or the workload is running really slow. And then they have to have more outages by shutting down the virtual machine, resizing it to a bigger size, the original size, and then restarting that. And that's quite a lot of hassle, and they start to get a lot of bad press from their end users that the cloud isn't good enough. And that's because they are optimizing without a good set of data. I always tell people to try and optimize maybe every 3 months, every quarter, every 6 months. That way you've got a good portion of data to understand what's going on in your cloud, and you can see the workloads that maybe spike maybe once a month or once every 2 months. And you can optimize your virtual machine size to appropriately. And maybe that is doing some automation where for the majority of the month, your virtual machine runs on one size, and then during out of hours, you maybe shut down that virtual machine, you spin it up to a bigger size so that it can accommodate that one workload that's maybe happening once or twice during the month. So start to be clever about the data that's being collected around your cloud and the resources available to you, and then try to optimize the cost there. But please don't get fixated on reducing the cost, because you're going to end up hitting some issues there, unfortunately. Now, arguably, secure and manage is a stage you should be doing throughout your migration. You should be thinking about it consistently and continually throughout your project. It isn't something you should be doing at the end of the project. And I say that because when you move to the cloud, there's a shared responsibility model. When you traditionally look after your on-premise data center, you're starting to look at everything. So physical security right up into the data stored on your servers. When you move into the cloud, there's a shared responsibility. Microsoft commit to the physical assets, the day-to-day operations of your data center, whereas you should really be focusing your attention and responsibilities around the networking, the virtual machines, the applications, the data stored on all of that. That's what you should be focusing on, and that's where you should start to move all your skill set towards. And as I said, it should be something you should be thinking about during the whole migration project, but it will become also a business as usual activity. It will be something that you'll constantly have to maybe readdress, have a different look at as new technologies come into play, as your staff get more skilled up into using the cloud, and you start to think of better ways of securing things, of managing all your workloads as well. This is probably as well the place where you start to think about your procedures and your documentation. Like I said, you don't want to get into the state where you've got out of date documentation and someone's accidentally spinning up that old on-prem server and it's causing issues. So really focus on updating your procedures and your documentation. I know no one in IT likes doing that, but it really is key when you migrate your workloads to somewhere else, so that everybody knows the correct place and the correct support procedures for actually logging a call with Microsoft if something does go wrong. Now, I've spoke a lot about the migration stage, and I have covered off a lot of it, but there's probably a lot I haven't covered off as well. And you can find great resources at the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework for Azure. Now, this is something that Microsoft employees, Microsoft partners, and Microsoft customers have all contributed to, and it's a growing document. So it's open source, and you can add to it if you want. It does look a bit daunting when you first open it up, as there's lots of resources available to you. But what I say is you can dive into it at certain sections. So under the adopt phase, you will find the migration information that you might need. There's also information about how you govern a cloud operating when you when you move to the cloud, how you can govern that, how you can make it more secure, how you can upskill your staff, how you can upskill some of your management team and make them understand how the cloud operates as well. We've also got the Azure Migrate Centre, which talks a lot about, again, the things that I've mentioned today. It also gives you a list of some great partners who you could leverage to actually do the migration for you. I've got a few customers who have outsourced their migration to third parties because they want to take advantage of migration experts, people who migrate companies to Azure all the time, instead of having to upskill their staff on doing the migration phase as well. So there's some great resources at the Migration Centre as well. I have pulled together a little website with all the resources that I've mentioned today, as well as a bunch of other information as well. So please take a note of that URL and check it out. And my contact details are listed on the slide as well below. So thank you for taking the time to listen to my session, and I'm happy to take any questions if there's any questions at all.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Thanks for this wonderful session. We do have about 6 or 7 different questions which are raised in the chat window.
Okay.
So do you want to have a look at them, or I can read them for you while you answer them?
Can you read them out for me, Nilesh, please?
Yeah, sure. The first one is from Martin, and he's asking how many servers do we install the agent on? Is it one or all the servers?
So if you're looking to do the discovery, you're probably going to have to install the agent on all of the servers within your environment. That is a lot of work, but you can script it. So if you use a tool like SCCM, or you can even PowerShell script it to install that agent. But the more servers you install the agent on, the more information you're going to get back, because the agent, I want to say trolls the server, but that sounds like it's doing something nefarious, but it's not. It's gathering the data about what's installed on your server and what communications it's making with other servers. So you can start off small, installing the agent on a few servers, and then grow it as you try and do those dependencies. But ultimately, you're probably going to have to install the agent on all of your servers.
Okay, so I think that pretty much answers the second question, which was, do we install agent on on-prem VMs or on Hyper-V host or on separate VMs altogether?
So it slightly depends. So if it's Hyper-V, you'll need to install the agent on all the virtual machines. If it's VMware you're installing it on, you can actually do the discovery agentless by using the connection through the vCenter server. And then with the physical servers, you have to install the agent on all the physical servers. So the answer actually depends on what environment you're using.
Okay. The next question is from Rivut. He's asking, does Migrate VMs connected to the Active Directory on-prem as well?
Sorry, could you repeat the question, Nileth?
The question was, does it migrate VM connected to Active Directory on-premise as well?
So you can move your virtual machines that are connected to Active Directory. What you'd obviously need to make sure is that you had a site-to-site VPN or an express route connection, so that if you're leaving your Active Directory on-prem, the servers you've moved up into Azure can still connect to Active Directory, or you have another solution up in the cloud. But yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Was that your question? Maybe you can reframe it.
Yeah, so actually I would like to know, right, when, let's say, our workloads that we want to shift to cloud is connected to on-prem AD, and this on-prem AD already sync with AAD. So when the automatic shift and load happen, will it use the AAD directly, or you still need to use this one, the side-to-side, point-to-side PPI?
Azure Active Directory doesn't do all the things I believe that Active Directory on-prem does. So I think you need to watch what you're actually doing. There are certain cases where Azure Active Directory isn't right depending on certain things that your application needs. So Azure Active Directory is a great product, but it's not the same functionality as Active Directory. So you really need to watch that. Some legacy applications will still need to use Active Directory because of all the, and I've forgotten the word now, all the functionality that we have on-prem in Active Directory that we've been using all these years. So it really depends on the specific workload and what you're actually trying to achieve. So that's a hard one to answer generically. I hope that helps a little though.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, the next question is, sometimes there are apprehensions to install agent on PCI enabled servers for security reasons. So do we have another solution?
So if you don't want to install the agent, or you can't because your security officers are a bit tight around all of that, what you can do is do a discovery using kind of manual intervention. So you can write down the name of your servers, you can write down the size of them, and then import that data from a spreadsheet into Azure Migrate. And it'll be able to give you a rough idea of whether things are going to be compatible and how much it's going to cost if you host it in Azure. What that doesn't do is the dependency mapping. That's where the agent really comes into play. So if you're reluctant to install the agent and you can't get past that, unfortunately, you're probably going to have to do the dependency mapping yourself. You're going to have to sit and look at log files. You're going to have to sit and look at your network traffic and understand what's going in and what ports are being used. The agent is super powerful, but I do know some customers that can't do that. And maybe Azure Migrate actually isn't the right tool for you because some of our third-party tooling doesn't need an agent. It has other security requirements, and you might have to open up ports within your network to do that dependencies mapping. So that's really where the power of having all those third-party tools within the portal kind of helps. So if that's a stumbling block, having agents installed on all your servers, maybe look at another third-party tool for that discovery phase for you.
Okay. So this is again coming from Nikhil. I guess he has a lot of use cases for migration. He's loaded with questions here. Thanks, Nikhil, for asking these questions. So the next one is, does data migration assessment work better for assessment or same in Migrate? Which is better?
So the data migration assessment is really for those SQL Server workloads, those data workloads that we have. They probably work in conjunction. So the Azure Migrate server assessment will give you that high level information about your server. The database migration assistant will tell you more about the SQL Server. So it'll tell you more about, do you have to host it as a virtual machine in Azure and go with that traditional SQL install, or can you actually leverage some of our PaaS solutions? So you probably have to use them in conjunction. They probably pair quite well together, but they're slightly different because the data will just focus on the data encapsulated inside the server, whereas the server migration or server assessment tool will function on the whole of the server, but not drill as far down as the data migrate assessment. So yeah, you probably have to use both tools, unfortunately.
Okay, I think that answers the next question. So the question was, can we just use Migrate for data migration as in DMS, or it's only for complete server migration?
Yeah, it's probably more for the actual data, for that SQL install, rather than the whole server. It won't migrate your operating system, your file shares, your usernames, all of that. It will just take the SQL, the little bit of SQL, and put that up for you. Yeah, there's different use cases for each of the tools.
Okay, the next question is regarding the recommendation. So the question is, does the assessment give us recommendations for instance type, SKUs with RAM, CPU to be chosen by Azure while the final migration task is ongoing?
Yep, so that information actually comes from the assessment. So during the assessment, if you've done a performance-based assessment, it will calculate the right size within Azure, and then you can pull that information from the assessment into the migration tool. So rather than take it as say you had a server with 2 cores and 8 gig of RAM, but actually Azure said only 1 core and 4 gig of RAM, it would migrate it into that smaller size for you during the migration stage if you pulled the information from the assessment report. Obviously, if you said no to using the data from the assessment report, it would just migrate it as is, and you'd end up with that 2 core and 8 gig RAM up in Azure for you.
Okay, I'm not very clear about the next question, Martin. It says, was that all IaaS migration, WYDC, out of Capita? So maybe you can rephrase it.
Hi, yes,
Hi.
yes, it's Martin here. I was smiling when you were saying that, Sarah, because I was confronted with an almost identical situation with a town that's in the centre of England. So that's my abbreviation, WYDC. It was a council, and they had to get out of a Capita data centre. So it was just, was it the same? Was it the same organisation? Was it a council?
Was it the same train which was passing through?
It might have been the same train track. It was a different customer. Unfortunately, I can't see the customer due to detection. But yeah, well. It was probably the same train track, though, to be honest.
Okay, cheers.
Okay, the next question is from Tarun, who is asking, when considering the migration, ASR also does the same thing as Azure Migrate, then why should we use Azure Migrate?
So yeah, that's a great question. The reason I would probably use Azure Migrate is because you can pull in that assessment data. So ASR will just lift and shift your servers from on-prem into Azure. It'll absolutely do that for you, and we've had great success with customers in the past. But what Azure Migrate gives us is the ability to do the proper assessment first, so we can do that performance-based assessment. We can group things as applications and workloads, and then pull that information that's been discovered into our migration tool. And like I showed you during the demo, we've taken the sizing recommendations, we've discovered the disks, all that mapping is done for us. ASR, although it's a very, very powerful tool and is excellent at what it doesn't have that assessment capability. It can't go down to that granular level. You can obviously use ASR to do that, but then when you do the migration, it's going to be a much more manual process to resize everything, to do some of the mappings, and to make sure everything happens. It really is our recommendation that ASR is our disaster recovery tool, and Azure Migrate is where we're putting all of our research and teams and knowledge into in terms of migration. So if you're asking for a feature within Azure Migrate that you don't currently see, that's where it's going to end up. It's going to end up in Azure Migrate in terms of the migration scenario. Anything you don't have at the moment for your disaster recovery needs, it will get invested and pushed into ASR. They're two very separate tools nowadays. But yeah, to be honest, you could use ASR, but Azure Migrate is really the one that we tell you to is the better place to use it because of the capabilities and the functionality that we have in it, and we're investing in it at the moment as well.
Okay. The next one is from Martin again. The question is, if you have huge file servers with low latency requirement, is lift and shift sensible, or should we really be thinking about Azure Files or even ANF?
That will ultimately depend on your strategy, I think, to be honest, Martin. It'll depend on whether you want to look after a server and then the file server in Azure, or when you want to go down that PaaS solution and be a bit more modern, and whether you can be a bit modern about how you connect into your file share. Either is a great solution. It just depends on, again, timeframes, budgets, what you're actually using those file shares for, how you want to authenticate. You know, there's tons